So welcome back. In our previous section, we looked at the question of free will. Look at moral responsibility. Objectives. By the end of this section, students should be able to define the term moral responsibility and distinguish between categorical and hypothetical necessities. What is moral responsibility? Moral responsibility, also referred to as moral obligation, is that duty that is strictly binding on the moral agent. It is a duty a moral agent ought to do or ought to pursue his or her fellow moral agent. Now, it's a moral obligation is expressed in terms of ought. If you remember in our sections previously, we talked about ethics, and we said that ethics deals with the ought, and it is the ought that distinguishes ethics from all other disciplines. In other words, it is binding. So we are saying a moral obligation is expressed in terms of ought, which in ethics means necessity. The necessity is either conditional, which is hypothetical, or unconditional, which is categorical. Let's move on to the next slide to explain these terms. We are saying that hypothetical means an expression such as, if you want to be fine, you ought to take that drug. Hypothetical in the sense that it is dependent on something. Now, if you remember, when you treated hypothetical syllogism and even what we call the horseshoe in critical thinking. So if P, modus ponens, if P, then Q. P, therefore Q. So it means that the acceptance of Q will be based on P being accepted. So if we accept P, then Q is logically inferred. For example, if I go to school, then I'll be a good student. I've gone to school, therefore I'm a good student. So that is hypothetical. It thrives on the expression if ... then. So we are saying that hypothetical expressions of moral responsibility obligation derives from the expression if you want to be fine, then you ought to take that drug. If you don't want to be fine, then you don't take the drug. But categorical in the sense that it is implicit. It is imperative. So we are saying that categorical expression in simple sentences like you ought to keep promises at all times. Here, the necessity or moral obligation of doing such an act is imperative, is commanding. In ethics, the moral obligation of a moral agent should aim at promoting the well-being but not the ill of other moral agents. In other words, as moral agents, whatever action we choose to pursue, we must be accountable for those actions, so that those actions we pursue will not have any negative impact on other moral agents. It should rather seek to promote the well-being of other moral agents. What are we saying? We are saying that moral responsibility, also referred to as moral obligation, is that duty that is strictly binding on the moral agent. It is a duty a moral agent morally ought to do to his or her fellow moral agent. It is thus expected of every moral agent to act freely and be responsible for whatever actions he or she has perpetuated. This is because if a moral agent fails to be responsible for his or her actions, there will be negative repercussions on that moral agent and the entire society to which he or she belongs. Thank you very much for listening to this section. Let's move on to the next section.